Donald Trump is obsessed with making Greenland part of America, calling it essential for national security. And he's not wrong. The US military already has a base in Greenland operated by Space Force, but they are limited by international treaties to observation and defensive missions only. What a bummer. But Trump is obsessed with making Greenland part of America, possibly because he's only ever seen a Mercator projection of the world, and he's so infatuated that he's even considering taking it over by military force. And I guess he wants to take the Panama Canal back from the Panamanians because of China, and also officially make Canada America's hat. Hey, Liz Dye, can he do that?
Thanks, Devin. Donald Trump is back in the White House, and already it's chaos. He really took that whole presidents can't do crimes thing to heart. Looks like we'll be spending a lot of time answering the question, can he do that? Although the Supreme Court has already said that nothing the president does in his official capacity can be criminal, so TLDR, yes. Thanks, Chief Justice Roberts. On the campaign trail, President Trump said he wanted to increase America's territory in multiple ways. He talked about buying or possibly annexing Greenland. He said he wanted to take back the Panama Canal. And he posted dozens of troll memes about making Canada the 51st state. In some sense, the answer to the question, can he do that, is yes. He can order the army to do any illegal thing he likes, and if his defense secretary is willing to carry out an illegal order, then yeah, he can.
Are you saying that you would stand in the breach and push back if you were given an illegal order?
I start by saying I reject the premise that President
I
Trump will be
understand
giving
you've done your
any
genuflecting
illegal
to him,
orders
but
at all.
This isn't a hypothetical, okay?
But okay, can the president simply invade another country and steal their land? Well, in theory, only Congress can declare war. Under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution, conveniently known as the Declare War Clause, Congress shall have the power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. But Article 2, Section 2 says that the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. And those two provisions have been in tension for most of the history of the Republic, which makes sense, right? Because the executive and legislative branches are always in a power struggle. That's what the framers meant by checks and balances. And here, you're talking about the president having active control over every aspect of the military, but needing congressional approval to use it. So the conflict is kind of baked in. So, for instance, Congress authorized President Lyndon Johnson to promote the maintenance of international peace and security in Southeast Asia in the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution of 1964. The legislators strongly opposed authorizing a full-blown war in Vietnam, but that didn't stop Presidents Johnson and Richard Nixon from relying on that resolution to justify a massively destructive conflict that included secret bombings in Cambodia and saw upwards of 1 million casualties. Hoping to avoid a repeat, Congress passed the War Powers Act of 1973 to fulfill the intent of the framers of the Constitution of the United States and ensure that the collective judgment of both the Congress and the President will apply to the introduction of United States armed forces into hostilities. It said that the President, in every possible instance, shall consult with Congress before introducing United States armed forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances. And it ordered the president to inform Congress within 48 hours of any emergency action and required regular reports and a withdrawal from action within 60 days without later congressional approval. Presidents in the modern era have routinely disregarded this law, calling it an unconstitutional usurpation of presidential authority. President Obama and President Trump both put American troops in Syria without congressional authorization. Obama sent the Navy into Libya in 2011 as part of the NATO operation to prevent dictator Muammar Gaddafi from slaughtering civilians, and Trump failed to inform Congress before assassinating Iranian military leader Qasem Soleimani in 2020. And when Congress does give permission for military action, presidents tend to interpret that quite liberally. The best illustration is the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, or AUMF, which empowered President George W. Bush to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. Since then, the 2001 AUMF has been used to justify military intervention in dozens of countries on 4 continents, including military exercises in countries as diverse as Thailand, Ethiopia, and Kazakhstan. In fact, the total number of countries where the U.S. military deployed pursuant to that 2001 AUMF remains a secret from the public and may never be known. So if the question is, will the War Powers Act stop Trump from ordering the U.S. military to invade another country without congressional approval? The answer is clearly no. American presidents in the modern era have conducted military operations first and then sought approval later, and if Donald Trump varies from that pattern, it will be by failing to seek approval after or ever. But if the question is whether it violates international law and our many treaty agreements to send in our military to rip off chunks of other countries, the answer is unequivocally yes. For instance, the UN Charter binds all members to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purpose of the United Nations. The U.S. is a founding member of the UN, an organization which has kept us out of another world war and ensured U.S. global hegemony for the past 80 years. So yeah, it would violate international law to send U.S. troops into another country which has not attacked us and just take it, even if the U.S. president says we need someone else's land for U.S. national security.
Now, obviously, if you're going to violate a century of international norms for a land grab, you'll want a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, let my law firm, the Eagle Team, help. If you've gotten in a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you got one of those data breach letters saying your information might have been leaked, or are dealing with a workers' comp or social security issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. Because it's so important to talk to a lawyer right away so you can maximize your recovery. And by the way, we don't get paid unless you do, so there's nothing up front. So just click on the link in the description or call the phone number that's on screen right now for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team.
But okay, let's talk about all the other countries Trump wants to gobble up. So zip up that anorak, cause we're going on a field trip. First up, Greenland. President Trump has long been fixated on annexing the giant island, much of which lies inside the Arctic Circle. Greenland is an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. By landmass, it's almost 2/3 as large as the United States, although most of it is covered by an ice sheet, for the time being anyway. Most of its 56,000 residents are Inuit, and the majority of the population is clustered on the southwest coast. In 2019, Trump floated the idea of buying Greenland from Denmark, potentially trading it for Puerto Rico. According to reporters Peter Baker and Susan Glasser, the idea came from billionaire cosmetics heir Ronald Lauder, although Trump says he thought of it all by himself. You take a look at a map. I'm a real estate developer. I look at a corner, I say, I gotta get that store for the building I'm building, etc. It's not that different. I love maps, and I always said, look at the size of this. It's massive. It should be a part of the United States.
Essentially, it's a large real estate deal. A lot of things could be done. It's hurting Denmark very badly because they're losing almost $700 million a year carrying it. So they carry it at a great loss. And strategically for the United States, it would be nice.
But the people of Greenland had other ideas. They suggested that Trump might think Greenland is a Danish colony, but that's his stupid imagination. And they said it sounds like something with slaves and colonial power where you can just take over a country. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen called the idea absurd, after which Trump canceled a planned trip to the country and threw a public tantrum about her nasty language.
Forward to going, but I thought that the Prime Minister's statement that it was absurd, it was an absurd idea, was nasty. I thought it was an inappropriate statement. All she had to do is say, no, we wouldn't be interested, but we can't treat the United States of America the way they treated us under President Obama. I thought it was a very not nice way of saying something. They could have told me no.
Because if there's one thing Donald Trump cannot abide, it's nasty language. This time around, Trump is being egged on by a whole different crew of rich guys, chief among them Elon Musk. Trump named tech entrepreneur Ken Howery as ambassador to Denmark, saying, for purposes of national security and freedom throughout the world, the United States of America feels that the ownership and control of Greenland is an absolute necessity. Ken will do a wonderful job in representing the interest of the United States. Howery co-founded PayPal with Musk and Peter Thiel in 1998, and Musk congratulated Howery, tweeting, "Congrats! Help America gain Greenland." Trump's putative justification for wanting to control Greenland is to protect America's national security. But that doesn't even make sense on its own terms. America is already the dominant power on the island. It has been since 1951 when we signed the Defense of Greenland Agreement between the United States and the Kingdom of Denmark. Thule Air Force Base, later named Badufik Space Base, is our northernmost military installation, which supports missile warning, missile defense, and space surveillance missions from the solid-state phased array radar operated by the 12th Space Warding Squadron and Satellite Command command and control through the Bidufik tracking station operated by the 23rd Space Operations Squadron. In plain English, it allows us to monitor Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic so we can keep an eye on our actual enemies in cooperation with our NATO allies. If we felt that our national security interests were jeopardized, we could expand our military presence in Greenland anytime we wanted. We're certainly not being blocked by Denmark. And in fact, in 2019, when China came knocking with a proposal to develop 3 airports that would have given it a toehold on the island, Trump's defense secretary, Jim Mattis, successfully negotiated with the Danish government to scupper the deal. Now, maybe we have other reasons for wanting to control the island. It's certainly rich in essential minerals such as lithium, niobium, and zirconium, as well as having potential hydrocarbon deposits that will become accessible as global warming causes the ice sheet to recede. American companies already have mining concessions there, but Greenlanders have been protective of their land and environment, and Trump, who wants to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, would probably have other plans if we controlled it.
We will drill, baby, drill.
But Trump also seems to have more sentimental ideas about cementing his legacy by increasing the U.S. territory in a way that Jefferson did with the Louisiana Purchase, or Lincoln's Secretary of State William Seward did when he negotiated to pay the Russian Empire $7.2 million for Alaska. And among the tech bro set, there's a certain romantic affinity for expanding U.S. territory by taking land that belongs to other people.
I think having a frontier is very healthy. I think Britain was a healthier society when it had a frontier.
For the record, that's Joe Lonsdale, another PayPal alum and a major Republican donor. But does he not understand that the frontier was not some empty wild place, but home to millions of indigenous people, like the Inuit population of Greenland? That's not unclaimed land, like ripe for the taking. It belongs to someone else. In fact, Greenlanders have said very clearly that they're not interested in becoming part of the United States. When the latest flap arose, Greenland's Prime Minister, Mute Egera, reiterated that Greenland is ours. We are not for sale and will never be for sale.
We will always be a part of NATO. We will always be a strong partner for US. We are close neighbors. We have been cooperated in the last 80 years. And I think the future have a lot to offer to cooperate with. But we want to also be clear. We don't want to be Americans. We don't want to be a part of US, but we want a strong cooperation together with US.
When Trump's buddies at the Nelk Boys YouTube channel traveled to Greenland to troll for Trump, they got a chilly reception. Donald Trump Jr. visited the capital city Nuuk and appeared to get a warmer welcome. But later reporting revealed that the happy crowd at his event included a large number of homeless people invited in off the street with the promise of a free meal. Greenland does have a strong independence movement and can declare independence from Denmark via referendum at any time. But they're not trying to be a part of the United States. And yet, Trump insists that we need to annex Greenland, and he's threatening to use economic and potentially military force to do it. As for whether he can enact tariffs, well, we made a whole video about that here. Under the Constitution, Congress has the power to enact tariffs, but it has delegated authority to the president to do so in the case of national emergencies. And so Trump will just pull the fire alarm, shout emergency, and do what he likes. Whether Americans will like it is another matter. The United States is heavily dependent on Danish pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk for both insulin and the weight loss drug Ozempic. Massive tariffs would clearly violate our free trade obligations as a member of the World Trade Organization, but we functionally kneecap that body, so YOLO. Again, check out that tariff video. Trump is also refusing to rule out using military force to get what he wants.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You look at, you don't even need binoculars. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen. We're not letting it happen. And if Denmark wants to get to a conclusion, but nobody knows if they even have any right, title, or interest. The people are going to probably vote for independence or to come into the United States. But if they did do that, then I would tariff Denmark at a very high level.
Let's assume for the sake of argument that Congress, or this Congress anyway, would greenlight any military intervention by Trump. Representative Andy Ogles has already proposed the Make Greenland Great Again Act to empower Trump to negotiate with Denmark to acquire the island. Here he is on Fox News explaining that colonies are good, actually, and if you're the dominant predator, they let you do it.
This is our area of operation, and we are, quite frankly, the dominant predator, cop, if you will.
That's cool, bro, but we're still talking about invading a NATO ally. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the collective security pact that ensured global stability for the past 75 years. The agreement that obliges every member state to come to the defense of the others in case of invasion. There is no predicting what kind of nightmare outcome would result from one NATO country attacking another based on poorly articulated ideas about national security. But okay. Let's talk about Panama, which Trump doesn't want to gobble up entirely. He just wants to recolonize a chunk of it. In his second inaugural address, Trump announced his intention to take the Panama Canal back.
President McKinley made our country very rich through tariffs and through talent. He was a natural businessman and gave Teddy Roosevelt the money for many of the great things he did, including the Panama Canal, which has foolishly been given to the country of Panama after the United States. The United States, think of this, spent more money than ever spent on a project before and lost 38,000 lives in the building of the Panama Canal. We have been treated very badly from this foolish gift that should have never been made, and Panama's promise to us has been broken. The purpose of our deal and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated. American ships are being severely overcharged and not treated fairly in any way, shape, or form, and that includes the United States Navy. And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
Okay, literally none of that is true. For one thing, only 5,600 deaths were recorded during the American phase of canal construction, and most of those were laborers from the West Indies, i.e. not Americans. But okay, to tackle this one, we'll need a little history lesson because Trump isn't wrong that President Roosevelt was the driver behind the construction of the Panama Canal. In fact, it's not an exaggeration to say that the nation of Panama, much less the canal, might not exist without Roosevelt's intervention. See, in 1882, a French company began construction of a canal through the Isthmus of Panama that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, sparing ships from having to circumnavigate South America. At the time, Panama was a state in the Republic of Colombia. By 1889, the French effort fell apart, and the U.S. government tried to buy the French canal concession. When the Colombian government refused the U.S.'s terms, America made a deal with Panamanian rebels to finance their separatist movement and sent the USS Nashville to anchor itself off the Panamanian coast in an unmistakable act of gunboat diplomacy. On November 3, 1903, Panamanian separatists declared independence. On November 6th, the United States recognized the Republic of Panama, and on November 18th, Panama and the U.S. signed the Hay-Bunalvaria Treaty, granting the U.S. permanent possession of the Panama Canal Zone, a roughly 10-mile-wide corridor encompassing the land that would eventually become the canal. The U.S. agreed to pay Panama's new government $10 million plus annual payments of $250,000. The deal was widely seen as grossly exploitative, benefiting American interests much more than those of the Panamanian people. The New York Post called it a vulgar and mercenary venture. But Roosevelt was committed to selling the plan to Americans, and so he embarked on a tour of the construction zone, famously getting himself photographed wearing a Panama hat astride a giant steam shovel. He said, "I took the isthmus, started the canal, and then left Congress not to debate the canal, but to debate me." And he was right. The president, who coined the phrase "speak softly and carry a big stick," used the threat of force to extract territory from a sovereign nation solely to promote American interests, and he sold the American public on it through a canny PR campaign. For 75 years, Panamanians chafed under what was functionally a 10-mile-wide colony running through their country. In fact, Panamanians were largely barred from entering the canal zone entirely. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter signed the Torrijos-Carter Treaty, which paved the way for the U.S. to cede control of the canal on December 31, 1999. The treaty was widely criticized by conservatives who thought giving up territory made America look weak, but it passed Congress with the necessary two-thirds support. Since then, the Panamanian government has run the canal in a highly professional manner, which makes sense since the country is heavily dependent on revenue from the canal to fund its government. But Trump believes that the United States as a superpower should control everything it wants to in the Western Hemisphere, and so he claims that Panama is in violation of the 1977 treaty based on something.
Our Navy and commerce have been treated in a very unfair and injudicious way. The fees being charged by Panama are ridiculous, highly unfair, especially knowing the extraordinary generosity that has been bestowed to Panama, I say very foolishly, by the United States. This complete ripoff of our country will immediately stop.
He says that Panama is charging exorbitant fees to the U.S. to transit the canal, or that management of the canal has been handed over to China. Neither one of those things is true. A Chinese company does own 2 of 5 ports adjacent to the canal, but it doesn't operate the canal, and there are certainly no Chinese soldiers running it. The reason that rates have gone up for all users of the canal is that it takes a tremendous amount of water to move ships through the canal system of locks, and there is a drought thanks to climate change. Again, it's very clear that Trump wants to control the Panama Canal for reasons that have very little to do with Panama's failure to live up to its agreements. But Panama is uninterested in handing it back over to the U.S. President Jose Raul Molina responded, "The canal is and will remain Panama's, and its administration will continue to be under Panamanian control with respect to its permanent neutrality. The canal was not a concession from anyone. It was the result of generational struggles that culminated in 1999 as a result of the Torrijos-Carter Treaty, and since then, for 25 years, we have managed it and expanded it with responsibility to serve the world and its trade, including the United States." Reminder, we signed an agreement which was duly ratified by Congress to give Panama back its land. This isn't like a mine which was nationalized by a hostile government. Panama is a sovereign nation that we made a deal with. And in reliance on that deal, the Panamanian government has made continuing investments in maintaining the canal, including a $5.6 billion expansion project which began in 2006 and took 10 years to complete. And yes, the U.S. military could indeed invade and take that canal over without tremendous difficulty. We have a really big army, but doing so would grossly violate our treaty obligations and cause ripple effects throughout our relationships with every other country. And to be clear, you can stretch that 2001 authorization for use of military force to cover a lot of things, but there's no argument here that Panama is engaged in terrorism. This would be a totally illegal use of force by the United States. But okay, let's head back up to the frozen north for a second and talk about Canada. Just kidding. That one's just a troll. We're not invading Canada. Be serious. Oh, you want more than that? Fine. Donald Trump spends a lot of time posting memes about Canada as the 51st state, and about hockey player Wayne Gretzky running for prime minister, and about making a prettier map.
Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No. Economic force, because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
Again, we are not spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year to protect Canada. That's just made up. Canada is one of our closest military and economic allies. Canadian troops served alongside American troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Balkans, as did Danish troops, by the way. Canada is a NATO ally with a very strong army. We're simply not going to invade Canada, and Trump conceded that himself. He did, however, threaten to slap a 25% tariff on all goods imported from Canada and Mexico, scrapping the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement that he himself negotiated in 2020, and ditching NAFTA. Canadian Immigration Minister Mark Miller called the whole idea of Canada becoming an American state ridiculous and likened the idea to a South Park episode. Former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that he privately shut down Trump's jokes, if they were that, about annexing Canada by proposing instead that we exchange in a territorial swap.
I'm assuming he didn't bring up his intention to publicly say he was going to annex through economic means your country.
It actually sort of came up at one point, and then we started musing back and forth about this. And when I started to suggest, well, maybe there could be a trade for Vermont or California for certain parts, he immediately decided that it was not that funny anymore, and we moved on to a different conversation.
And if Trump thinks he's going to bully Canada into becoming a vassal state with punishing tariffs, he's likely mistaken. Trudeau has signaled that he's willing to impose dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs on American exports to Canada, so good luck. But okay, brass tacks. If Donald Trump orders the army to invade Canada, it would be wildly illegal, and also there would be no one to stop him, certainly not his Secretary of Defense.
Carry out an order from President Trump to seize Greenland, a territory of our NATO ally Denmark.
Senator, I will emphasize that President Trump received 77 million votes to be the lawful commander-in-chief of this country.
We're not talking about the election. My question is, would you use our military to take over Greenland or an ally of Denmark?
Senator, one of the things that President Trump is so good at is never strategically tipping his hand.
Again, thanks, Chief Justice Roberts. We couldn't have done this without you.
Thanks, Liz. Now, I know it might seem hard to believe, but stories like these are almost always more nuanced and complex than Donald Trump would have us believe. And oftentimes the important details are hidden because of media bias. This particular story was covered by 391 news sources, with about 40% on right-wing media, 35% from the center, and 25% from left-of-center media. And when you examine the headlines, you start to see some very different frames emerge that shape how readers interpret and understand the events that are unfolding. On the right, headlines emphasize Trump's claim that acquiring Greenland is an absolute necessity, while on the left, headlines typically focus on Greenland's leaders shutting Trump down using phrases like "Greenland says nope," or calling Trump's proposals goofy. And a common theme from center sources is simply reporting that acquiring Greenland is something that Trump, quote, wants to do without using emotionally charged language, which itself is a form of bias. But the headlines you read first have immense power to shape how you understand the news. And that's why I like to get my news from as many angles as I can, which I do with the help of today's sponsor, Ground News. Because Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. And right now they're offering LegalEagle viewers 40% off their unlimited access Vantage subscription. You can scan the QR code or use the link in the description to get a discount for a limited time. Because Ground News gathers related articles from around the world and across the political spectrum, so you can see the bias and compare coverage. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. And one of my favorite parts is their bias comparison feature, which highlights specific differences in reporting across the political spectrum. This can be especially helpful when reading stories from sources that you've never heard of, or where there's no telling who owns it or what their agenda might be. I also love their blind spot feature, which shows you stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum. Like this story about Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski calling Greenland an ally, not an asset, which left-leaning sources largely ignored. And it helps explain why we often talk past each other, and some people seem hyper-focused on what seems like nonsense, often because some random blog post went viral among certain people. But all this is why Ground News is my favorite way to get the news. And as a legal eaglet, you can save 40% off of the Ground News Vantage subscription by scanning the code on screen or clicking on the link down below. This subscription gives you unlimited access to every feature, including the Bias Insight tool and the blind spot feed. And by subscribing, you'll support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape even more transparent. So click on the link below or scan the code today. And after that, click on this link over here for more Legal Eagle, or I'll see you in court.